Mushrooms in your coffee? I mean, I know you've seen the post, you've heard the buzz, but maybe you're still wondering what exactly is mushroom coffee and why in the world would anyone drink it? Is it just another wellness fad? Or is there actually something to it? While it might sound strange, like a strange combination, the trend of blending medicinal mushrooms, and no, not the kind on your pizza and not the kind that create psychedelic things that we hear about, but adding them into beverages has exploded for good reasons, promising everything from boosting your energy, clearing the brain fog, and so much more. But mushrooms in coffee, is that the best way to get medicinal mushrooms, or is there a better way? If you've tasted mushroom coffees, you might already be saying, no, thank you. But hear me out. I found something that is better tasting and that even non-coffee drinkers like myself, because I'm not a coffee drinker, can benefit from. Today, Wade from Bioptimizers breaks down what we need to know about the mushroom coffee hype, why it's not what you're probably picturing, why this matters, especially for us women in midlife, and how this mushroom breakthrough offers something different, specifically addressing women in midlife. Thank you so much, Wade, for being here today with me.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I went to you about this topic because anyone listening knows I absolutely love your product line. I talk about your enzymes consistently. I love, so if you have not gotten on Masszymes yet, y'all, you're missing out here. I take their enzymes with every meal I have. It helps us break down protein and get more. And I also, Wade always gives me a new tip every time, and I end up adding new products to my daily stuff. Last time I interviewed you, Wade, you turned me on to microbiome breakthrough. You promised me it tasted like vanilla frosting, and I laughed at you. And now I crave it. Like first thing every morning, it's like the first thing I scoop into my mouth is that. I just eat it like frosting. It's good. You're right. So, but I wanted to come to you because every time I reorder product from you guys, you send a mushroom breakthrough. And every time I get it, I hand it to my husband. I'm like, I don't understand. What is this? And I thought, okay, enough people have asked me about mushrooms and what they're for. So I thought, let's all learn together. Even though I have started using it, I don't fully understand it yet. So I'm learning just like my listeners are. So thanks for jumping on and let's talk about this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much. So if you go into what mushrooms is, which is a family of mycelium, which is about 14,000 different species. And what we call a mushroom is actually the fruit produced by mycelium. Mycelium is the largest organisms on the planet. In fact, they create a neural network that literally connects the entire Earth together. And so whole forests and fields and everything have different types of these mycelium. And then occasionally you'll see these, mushrooms pop up. You'll also see them growing on trees, and you'll see them in different elements. Now, there's a fellow by the name of Paul Stamets that probably brought it more to the American mindset. And of course, his famous thing is he took some magic mushrooms in a thunderstorm and had a transformative psychological experience and lost his stuttering, which was a big thing. And he founded a mushroom company. But mushrooms have had a cultural and health element permeating through virtually every culture of the world throughout history. And we might understand why mushrooms are unique, say, to other superfoods or other plants or vegetables or anything that you can consume. And it turns out that if you go back in time about 300 million years ago, I think it is, something along those lines. We actually are part of the same ancestral development in that a mushroom digests everything on its outside surface.
Okay.
Where we went into creating a digestive system internally. The neural networks that are laid down in our body are very similar to the neural networks that are put together through the mycelium under the surface of the earth that connects everything. So some of the elements of Avatar actually have some legitimate biological connection to the real world. And that's fascinating that there's this interconnected web of mycelium. So why that's important in humans is because some of these characteristics that we still, inherited through the genetic elements, it means that mushrooms work symbiotically with many of the functions inside of the body, particularly in cognitive function and immunoresponse. Because, for example, the way that you manufacture your immune system in a mushroom is similar to how we do it in our body. We just do it internally. The mushroom does it externally. And you can train mushrooms to just handle just about anything. I mean, they've done experiments where they can take mushrooms that'll take nuclear waste and create it inert. It can eat up all kinds of stuff. So
Is
they're
this why
fascinating species.
this is going to be a weird question, maybe, but this is where my head's going. Is this why it grows on the outside of like cow poop and
Correct.
stuff? Okay. It's
Correct.
decomposing it? Is that what that's
That's what
doing?
it's doing. That's what it's doing. And you can teach
Oh.
mushrooms to decompose just about anything. And now, in order to live, there's both a process of creation and a process of decay. What's interesting about the mushroom elements and the cognitive elements is
Hmm.
there's an element that we require for a process called neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is
Hmm.
essentially the development of new neurons inside of the brain, which was thought to be static for many, many years in psychology research.
Hmm.
And turns out that's not true. Turns out that your body can build new neurons and new neurosynaptic connexes. That's the connection between
Okay.
axon and dendrites in the brain. Okay, what's that mean, Wade? Well, it means the development of all of your cognitive processes, whether that is skill development, learning how to throw a
Yep.
baseball, whether that is thinking through a challenge or a process, recollection, memory. All of
Okay.
that is connected to how well your axons dendrites. And as we age, we see a decline in BDNF. So BDNF is really high, for example, in babies because they're laying down all these neural networks and they grow and
Right.
develop and they have a high capability to learn. As we get older, oftentimes due to diet, aging, degeneration, toxicity, etc., we lower our BDNF. And so the typical methodology that people do in order to kind of get them wake up and go is they'll use something like coffee to give them
Hmm.
a spike in adrenaline and cortisol. And that creates an acceleration of synaptic firing, which means that you're essentially putting a turbocharger on your 4 horsepower
Yep.
four cylinder engine. And that engine will get the power, but it'll burn out faster. And so you need increasing amounts of coffee, and then you have the negative
Hmm.
side effects that persist over time for that. Now, I'm not against coffee. I like coffee and all that sort of stuff. But you want to offset some of the stimulatory elements of that with other elements. It turns out mushrooms are really good for that, but mushrooms on their own can be an actual replacement. So instead of running a 4 cylinder, you
Hmm.
can have an 8 cylinder instead, which gives you a lot more power, smooth flow, and probably longer durability in your engine, which is your brain, which is how we determine our life. So
And it's not doing it as because it's a stimulant. It's not like that external
correct.
stimulant. Okay.
Correct. You're just beefing up your absolute horsepower in the
Okay.
brain by flooding the system with things like BDNF. So, for example, let's take a look at memory. Memory
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
probably the thing that we notice the most as we age starting to decline. And a lot of that has to do with you have these axon dendrite connections, just
Hmm.
like the mycelium in the planet. And when you have a strong memory connection, and emotional signaling is something that anchors the connectivity. That's why Tony Robbins takes people through these
Yep.
high and low elements to recreate emotional states and to override suboptimal ones and to instill new ones because it's the fastest way to create new neural patterns. But as we age, these connections get looser and looser, or it's like maybe you had a high level of skill in a sport or something like that,
Yep.
and then you stop using it, and then all of a sudden you come back to it. You have those original neural pathways, but they're sticky, they're not that good, and you,
Hmm.
you have to repractice that element for a period of time before you can get back to your level to reactivate that neural pathway. That becomes more and more difficult as we age. And so one avenue is to do the stimulatory effect, which is burning the candle
Hmm.
at both ends. The other is why don't I just flood my system with the right elements that would improve this element called BDNF, which improves neuronal development and neuroplasticity and neural connectivity, which the end result is improved cognitive function. Hormones play a big element inside of this. So as a woman's hormones tend to become a little bit more dysregulated as they enter into the middle age, that hormonal impact reduces the production of BDNF significantly. And that's
Hmm.
where did I put my keys? Oh my God, I
Yeah.
forgot to do that thing. I went to the store. I'm standing there blanking out in my mind. I don't know why. I must be tired. I must be these things. And so we look in the wrong areas as opposed to finding supportive elements. So mushrooms have been used historically for thousands of years in extensive medical literature, Ayurvedic, Chinese medicine, also in the Middle East. Also, it's a very strong culture in the European cultures, particularly in the Scandinavian countries. They've been used excessively. Most people I think for a long time had a negative connotation of
Hmm.
mushrooms that had some sort of cognitive state because everyone associates, oh, it's magic mushrooms.
Psychedelics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to get psychedelics and stuff, all that sort of stuff. But there's a whole range of elements that mushrooms can provide. So when we started looking at, and I'll tell you a personal story, Matt and I, my business partner, as we headed into our 40s, started to notice some cognitive decline, particularly
Hmm.
around memory.
Okay.
And it was really challenging for me because I have an extraordinary memory and I've had that. I think I've inherited it. My grandfather had the same thing. My father had the same thing. So there's a genetic element to it. But I started to lose this skill that I had relied on for so long and so conveniently. I was like, what's going on here? So I realized, oh, I'm actually using too many stimulants
Hmm.
to keep to meet my commitments to my business and my
Which a
family and all
lot of
this
us
stuff.
do. It's a very common
Yeah.
thing. Yep.
Sure. And I'm not creating the supportive elements for my brain. So we hooked ourselves up to EEGs. We did neurofeedback training. We did
Hmm.
psychological assessments. And I got into a conversation with a fellow by the name of Jeff Chilton. He's been a mushroom farmer for over 50 years. And he had I had read in the literature and had experimented with mushrooms, but didn't get that much results. And I was like,
Hmm.
I don't know if it's working or not. I try things like some things typed are, I felt a little something, but nothing consistent that was, definitive in improving my cognitive function. And I randomly ended up in a conversation with Jeff. And Jeff, who's been in the industry for 50 years, is, well, the reason you're not getting the benefits from the mushrooms that you think is because most of the American companies that are producing mushrooms are actually giving you more cellulose than they are mushrooms. So you'll see a mushroom sample and
Hmm.
they grow a lot of these mediums on cellulose, which is like what you'd see on a tree. Like
Okay.
it provides a lot of cellulose that it can digest and absorb
Which
and
is basically like
utilize.
wood fiber, right? Is that
Correct.
okay?
Correct. Now the challenge is that most of the companies were including the wood fiber with the mushroom. So you're thinking you're getting 500
Wow.
milligrams or a gram of this or a gram and a half. You're getting a fraction of that, and nobody is discerning to the public about that. And I was like, oh
Because
wow,
cellulose is kind of marketed as it's like a filler, right? And it's supposed to help keep things separated. And it's also isn't that the reason for it? Why a lot of
yeah,
things have
yeah,
that?
yeah. It's a plant fiber.
Okay.
And the one positive element of cellulose is that it can be a supportive element for a lot of bacteria cultures in your microbiome. The downside is a lot of people have challenges
Hmm.
digesting cellulose. And for example, if you're one of those people that genetically has a suboptimal microbiome, you've got a lot of
Hmm.
antibiotics, or you have trouble digesting plants, for example,
Yep.
chances are you have a suboptimal microbiome and genetic history that allows you to break that cellulose down. We address that with our enzymes and all
Hmm.
that sort of stuff. But moving beyond that, let's get back to the mushroom conversation. So talking to Jeff, I said, well, can you give me some of this pure stuff, right?
Hmm.
What is
Hmm.
that thing? So, and I said, well, we've got this cognitive decline method. We've seen in the literature, I need to take about 3 grams a day to get a benefit. I've tried these other supplements. I've taken the 3 grams a day. I didn't really notice a
Hmm.
difference. He says, okay, here, try this. And he actually showed me the demonstration of how the cellulose and all this stuff. So I said, great.
Hmm.
So I got this from Jeff. It was great. Within a week, my memory just sharpened up dramatically. And then Matt had the
Really?
exact same experience. Then when we took it to the
And
test,
you
we
were just
went
doing
to,
this like once a day, just having like the three
yeah, I
grams.
took 3 grams
Mhm.
a day.
Okay.
And then we went to neurofeedback training. And
Hmm.
if you do neurofeedback training the way we do, we do a compressed week where we're doing, 6 to 8 hours of training a day.
Okay.
It's really taxing on the body, and eventually your brain kind of crashes. And so we started using mushrooms in order to support that, and we were able to double the amount of training time that we were able to do. So before we were only doing 3 hours, we were doing 6, 7, 8 hours when we were supported by the mushrooms because we were producing all this BDNF. So, man, there's a lot of people that could benefit from this
Uh-huh.
type of elements. The problem was that when you went out there and started looking at some of the big mushroom blends, whether it was chaga and lion's mane or et cetera, that you couldn't take enough of it to get the effective dose. So when you're looking at the literature, the research papers, the historical elements, whatever it happens, they were taking literally pounds of mushrooms to produce these results.
Yep.
You had to eat a lot of these mushrooms to
Yeah.
get that
A
results.
lot.
And so what happened is the industry took the research, created these suboptimal products, knowingly or unknowingly, because
Mhm.
most people just ain't even aware of the sourcing ingredients, produced the product. Maybe it tasted good. Maybe people liked the flavor. It became kind of popular, and people, well, I think it's good for me, and I feel a little bit or something, and it's
Yeah.
great. I mix this stuff in my coffee, and it's great. But we knew from an efficacy standpoint when we broke down all the mushroom blends that were out there, like there's not enough in here to give you the kick.
So like some people, it was probably a placebo thing. Like they hear it and now they're
Sure.
like, I'm gonna take this. It's the trendy thing. And they're mixing it with coffee. So they're getting a little bit of that outside stimulant. So they're believing that that's changing things for them.
Yes, and simultaneously, I went and was getting. I'm from a place in Canada called New Brunswick, and it turns out that in New Brunswick, you have high amounts of some of the best chaga in the world. It grows on the birch
Mhm.
trees. Russia and Eastern Canada are great places for it. And so, well, my aunt was knocking this stuff off the trees and drinking this tea and had all these medicines. So I said, well, let's do that. And when I drank the chaga tea that was from the real mushrooms, it's kind of like a charcoaly type
Mhm.
substance. I was like, wow, I feel amazing. I feel
Mhm.
energized. I get like, this is really something my parents noticed it. I was like, okay. So I know mushrooms work.
Okay.
But how do I get this into a simple, usable element that can help a person take a ritual to go through a week or 2 weeks of doing this so that they can get the performative benefit that's definite in their own
Yes.
world?
And then one
So,
clarifying question here, real quick, before you share that. When you said like 3 grams to really get an effect, would that like if you're looking at these different kinds like lion's mane, cordyceps, chaga, like it was that 3 grams of each one separately, or could it
well,
be a
that was at the
combination?
lion's manes in particular. The other ones
Okay.
needed different elements.
Okay, got it.
So I was like, well, if I'm going to take all these different mushrooms, and we'd identified those four as some of the best ones, we're like, well, how much of this would I need? And it turned out I was going to need about 50 capsules. And I was like, okay,
Wow.
well, I'm not capsule averse. Like, I'll go
No,
do it. But I'm like, no one's going to
that's
do
a
this,
lot.
Matt. Like, and he's
50.
like, yeah, I agree
In
with you on
addition to
that.
other supplements. Yeah.
So we went back to the best mushroom experts in the world, Jeff being one of them, and said, hey, look, how do we get this into a serving size with the
Hmm.
potency that we want? So there's the sourcing, but he's, well, there's a way that you can extract the most potent elements out of the mushroom that make the effect.
Okay.
And so you can get these 100 to 1 and 50 to 1 extracts. And if you go to that, basically you're able to get the equivalent. We combine those four main mushrooms in a specific order to get a therapeutic dose of each one of them. For example, lion's mane,
Yeah.
one drink of mushroom breakthrough contains about 1.2 pounds of mushrooms
Whoa.
from an extract point of view. So now you drink it and all of a sudden it's like, bang, wow, I feel different in my brain. What's going on here with just a serving? And it's like, oh, okay. So now we had something. We worked with a classically trained chef because if mushrooms are an acquired taste, they're a taste that's not really common within the Western palate. It's more of an Eastern palate. It's a little bit pungenty. And so we realized, oh, that's not going to great. So we worked with this chef, say, hey, how do we make this taste? And what's interesting, if you combine mushrooms with
Hmm.
really good, like cacao, and then
Hmm.
you sweeten it with like a protein sweetener, and you can not get the calories, but you get this like cocoa type flavor.
Right.
And mushrooms work really well with chocolate. It's interesting.
Yes.
If I remember, but going back to the in Vancouver, there was this famous beach called Wreck Beach. It was a naked beach, and there was people selling chocolate mushrooms so people could
That's
get
also
high.
what
And I
they
was
do
like,
with
oh yeah, yeah.
psychedelics. A lot
Oh
of them
yeah,
mix
yeah.
the
I know
cacao with
that
that.
connection because I remember I
Yeah.
tried some of those mushrooms. They tasted good, and if you take the mushroom itself, it tastes like garbage.
Yeah, but they
But
do
you
that with
take
the
it, it's
psychedelic mushrooms too, right? That's like a common
right.
thing.
So
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, let's do the chocolate mushrooms that aren't psychedelics that have the,
Hmm.
the health boosting benefits that we could do. And it turns out we were able to come up with what we called mushroom breakthrough. And mushroom breakthrough combines the four most potent mushrooms, which can really have a positive impact. So,
And that's lion's mane, cordyceps, chaga, and what was the fourth?
yes. So let me go through these. So we
Okay.
got lion's mane, right?
Okay.
To me, that's the grand master of them all. And that works particularly in the hippocampus, which is your memory, the BDNF center.
Hmm.
Okay. And then, we got a 50-time concentration on that. Then we go into Reishi.
Okay.
So now Reishi, known in Chinese medicine, is called the king of mushrooms. I'm preference to lion's mane, but
Hmm.
I think a lot of women would really probably say, no, 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 I'll take my reishi because one of the elements that's really beneficial of reishi is it helps during emotional problems and as well as stressful problems like when a person's going through their cycle, right? And it's really good on the immune system, fatigue, and helps you feel kind of happier. So it has a mood regulatory aspect because of where it stimulates the brain. Then there's cordyceps.
Hmm.
Cordyceps is for energy levels and libido. And the
Oh,
reason why that helps, it's really key in oxygen utilization, especially during exercise. It also has a memory enhancing effect. Actually, all of these seem to improve memory from different mechanisms. It also is used for the reduction of stress. Chaga, I talked about that, which is my aunt who has been a big advocate of that for years, knocks it off the birch trees. I used to drink that. I really like the affiliate. It's an immune system element. It's been used particularly in the northern climates, drank during the winter because you could easily access these things in those places where, the snow's on there and you kind of reach up and knock these chaga things and you boil it down. It has all these nutrients and vitamins. It's great for antibacterial and antiviral properties. Also a stimulatory aspect on memory loss, right? This is really good. So keep in mind, this is also part of the rapid learning elements that you would be looking for to get the kind of benefits that we're talking from. So these are the kind of elements that we've stuffed into Mushroom Breakthrough in order to combine them into a unique formula where people can feel the effect in their very first melon. So what's the feeling? I would say a calm, clear, resourceful state that is almost subtly euphoric. Because you know how those days when you're in flow and you're just kind of hitting it and you're just kind of rolling?
Yeah.
That's the state when you have an optimized neurochemistry. So there is a biological component to it. As your hormones decline, it's harder and harder to get to that state. So, you get that feeling. I just don't feel like myself.
Right.
Things aren't really flowing. I'm not getting into that state. Well, what you're really describing on an emotional or experiential level is a diminishment of the neurochemicals and these elements that mushrooms can support. And so by doing that, a lot of people will first start mixing it in their coffees because they're probably taking coffees. They didn't get enough sleep. They're running their roads. They're trying to get everything done. So I say, add it to your coffee and see what happens. Put a couple scoops. It makes like a really nice chocolatey drink. Doesn't have the calories or anything else. Add some really nice, rich, creamy notes to it that taste great. So it masks any of the nasty flavors that mushrooms might entail. And it's actually, it's like, wow, my coffee's better. A lot of people after a month or two on it drop the coffee altogether. And
because it sounds like the caffeine in the coffee is just like the front loaded piece, right? Like, because that's got the caffeine, it's got that initial thing. But what you're saying is you're doing this, it's more like a therapeutic effect. So it's going to compound over time. I'd imagine the more you do it, and you're actually getting to the root of things. So you don't need the caffeine. This is going to do that instead because you're actually fixing the problem versus just doing an outside stimulant. Am I saying that right?
100% accurate. We also threw in a little bit of collagen because that has some benefits also in order to support the cognitive function and brain function. There's a transfer in excellence. You can also add extra, if you're taking collagen right now, it'll work harmoniously. You might get a better result if your collagen does. I know a lot of ladies like to take collagen, but we threw a little bit of that in there as well because it's a supportive element to the whole mushroom blend. And again, with these 150 to 1 extracts, you take these 2 little scoops and put it in your coffee or put it in a drink, or you can mix. I like it with a protein shake. I think it stacks up actually really well with protein drink, simply because the protein can provide the amino acids that will also accelerate the neurotransmitter production. So there's a big movement right now, particularly in the women's movement of wake up in the morning, get your protein in, you get that 100 grams, as fast as you possibly can in the day. It has a satiety effect. Why does it have a satiety effect? It has a satiety effect because it makes the neurotransmitters that regulate your apostat, which makes you hungry or not hungry.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. Okay, so I have some questions here. So I've got some mushroom questions, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. Specifically with Mushroom Breakthrough, you said you can add it to coffee. You said you can also just mix it with water. You can add it to protein shake. Is there other ways? Like, could you is there any way that would hurt it? Like, for instance, like when people used to drink whey protein, you couldn't heat it up because it would denature it. Like, is there anything that would hurt? Like, could you bake with this? Could you add, like, what? Yes. What's the limit on here?
Yeah, these are extremely resistant to heat temperatures. So you could boil it and you could boil water. And sometimes, like, for example, in the case of chaga, to get the extract the process, the boiling process is an element that extracts this particular antioxidants and nutrients out of the chaga itself. So it's much more heat resistant than, say, other supplements that you might take. I have a whole thing that I did when I was getting ready for the Mr. Olympia in my 50s. I made a protein pudding, and I put protein breakthrough, and I put the microbiome breakthrough, and then I put the mushroom breakthrough all in a mixture together.
With what? Just water or anything else?
Just a little tiny bit of water. Not
Okay.
very much. And people go, why do you do that? Because I didn't want it to turn into a liquid. I would
Right.
turn it into a pudding.
And it tastes like a pudding. I trust you
Oh
now that
my
you told
God,
me about the
it
frosting
is
thing.
it's killer. And I was like, I'm eating chocolate twice a day and getting ripped to shreds. People are like, how's that
Okay.
possible? And so I showed people how I was doing that.
Uh-huh.
And it's amazing. You can also stack it with oatmeal. And here's things with kids.
Okay.
Okay. So kids, particularly, I have a couple of godsons and I can't wait. My son just turned 4.5 months. So in a few
Aw.
more weeks, we're going to be able to start putting them on this mix, which is when you provide them the protein and the mushroom breakthrough in a pudding,
Yep.
like my godson, he mixes it all up. He demands to his mother every morning that he has his protein pudding. And she noticed that his ability to self regulate his emotions and his ability to
Aw.
learn, his ability to stay focused on his schoolwork was much better when he had the mushrooms inside his breakfast thing. And it's fun, it's chocolatey, doesn't
Yeah.
have any of the negative calories. Right. She mixes a little bit of yogurt in it sometimes.
Yeah.
You can add in other elements because that chocolatey flavor will round out some of the things that a child is averse to. So, and you can make it fun and the kids are doing it and everything. And that provides them a level of BDNF that really outcompetes their peers. And that allows them to accelerate, build confidence, to have the available neurochemical resources so they feel good. So whether you're a kid or whether you're a middle-aged lady, it doesn't matter. You still need those neurochemical resources, and that gives you the confidence to tackle the tough challenges of a changing world.
Well, and I'm just thinking of so many different uses that I wasn't aware of for this, but like just ADHD as an alternative to meds for that, that would make sense too. Because everything you hit, the focus, the energy, all of that could be, I wonder if that's if that's been tested at all on that, if anyone with that has tried
Well, it's
this.
very interesting because I've dealt with it with a number of my friends and everything else. And so, first off, I want to be clear: I'm not a psychotherapist
Mm-hmm.
or anyone. I'm not recommending anything. But here's what I do know: I do know that it is possible to get off chronic pharmaceutical drugs using a high quality, well orchestrated nutritional supplement program by weaning off these pharmaceuticals and supporting it. And one of the key elements to supporting it is mushrooms, B12, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had a friend of mine recently who's in her 50s who was on SSRIs for literally since she was a teenager.
Wow.
And over the course of, I believe it was just over 6 months, I had a naturopathic doctor friend of mine put that in, and she was using a combination of mushrooms. She was doing a gut
Okay.
stack because your gut and your brain are connected. So she fixed her gut. She
Yep.
provided the elements her body wasn't able to methylate or provide properly. She used mushrooms to support the transfer from going off the pharmaceuticals and easing the side effects
Yep.
of coming off and coming back on. And now she's been off for the last 18 months and have never
Wow.
felt better in her entire life. So a lot of these cognitive problems actually stem from chronic nutritional deficiencies. And I'll cite the research from a fellow by the name of Dr. Linus Pauling. People might know him. He was a two-time Nobel Prize winner that wrote a book, which I read, which
Mm-hmm.
was pretty heavy-duty stuff, which was the foundation of treating illnesses. It was called orthomolecular psychiatry. And these were psychiatrists that turned the entire psychiatric world upside down in the 70s because they said we could treat a lot of these dysfunctional conditions, hyperactivity, ADHD, depression and stuff by hyperdosing vitamins and minerals. And by doing that, whether that was a detoxification element like high dosage of vitamin C or providing a whole range of B vitamins to improve the
Mm-hmm.
methylation process to make the neurotransmitters. And this was a tipping point for me because I know so many people that suffered from all these conditions and then they had all the side effects from the pharmaceuticals and their life was really, really challenging. And I have a lot of empathy. And you see the rise of these mental health issues
Mm-hmm.
correlate to the lack of nutrition. And so
Yeah.
by reversing that trend and focusing on this element, they were able to make resounding transformational changes. These are, these are scientific heavyweights. And a lot
Yeah.
of that information was buried for decades and then was revived again. And there's this whole movement in orthomolecular nutrition is that, well, maybe some of these conditions are because of chronic deficiency. And now cognitive health, particularly for women as they get older, they seem to be far more susceptible to the degenerative conditions of cognitive health as you age. And usually the beginning signs really hit home at the element when they're going through, perimenopause, menopause, all that area, because all of a sudden you have these wild fluctuations on your hormone
Sure,
levels. And
especially
hormone
that
levels are
massive,
like, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that massive dip in estrogen is going to create that right away.
Correct. And hormones, you have to realize, are like, that's like the gas pedal in your life. You can take exogenous hormones and you'll get a boost because you're putting the gas on, but you're going to drain the tank of nutrients much faster. Just like if you've got a sports car, it drives,
Yep.
it burns gas a lot faster than your daily driver. That's a little four-cylinder that you kind of hum along in. And so one of the elements in order to support yourself is to realize, if I fill up my tank with the nutrients, then I don't have to turn on the turbos in order to get my life in order. And this is where elements like mushrooms, getting a genetic test, going through that, having a proper dietary analysis in correlation with your ND, so you can look at, oh, these are the tendencies where I might have a little bit more challenging to produce. So that's where I need to focus my supplementation on in particular. So I believe that we are now in the age of targeted nutritional supplementation for the individual, where they're at hormonally, where they're at biochemically, and where they are biologically or genetically, and as well as the microbiome. And if you address those issues, it's great. Now, with the mushrooms, it's really great because you can just bypass a lot of the mechanisms, because these elements are common to virtually everybody at some level as you age and climb. Very few people accuse a 90-year-old of having sharper memory than a 25-year-old.
Right.
Right. So
sense.
we all kind of know that, yeah, grandma's starting to
Yep.
lose it, those kind of
For
conversations,
sure.
right? Is it's kind of an expected element that we kind of think that's not going to happen to us till it starts to happen to us. And you're like, oh no, am I going down that road?
Right.
So I say, stop the truck right now, start putting some mushrooms into your brain and reverse that trend. And you can retain, I believe, near perfect cognitive function for however long you're here on the earth if you were supporting yourself with the proper mushrooms.
Okay, I've got a few clarifying questions here. So, okay, so just like if somebody's taking a 5-HTP supplement or something and they're not supposed to take that, it says don't do that with if you're already on an SSRI or something. Is there any issue with adding in mushrooms or adding this in if you are on a prescription? I know you said it could be under medical supervision, you could come off, but could you do them together? Is that a problem?
First off, I'm not a doctor, so I can't make that analysis, but you want to always check with your physician. However, I've literally got hundreds and hundreds of people who were on, some of them very heavy pharmaceutical medications for cognitive health or memory or emotional regulation. They started taking the mushroom breakthrough and they all
Like
noticed
with it,
yeah,
taking it with,
same time.
okay, so, okay.
And they all noticed significant improvements. And oftentimes the improvements were so significant, they said they started researching to get a good naturopathic doctor to get them off, because for the first time in maybe decades, they thought I've got hope that I can fix my brain.
Wow.
Yeah. And my wife, she's taken her PhD in psychology. And so we have a lot of conversations about this, with the people that she's working with and the research that she's getting. And, there's a big thing with Dr. Van der Kolk talking about comparative analysis between cognitive behavioral therapy, pharmaceuticals, traditional plant and mushroom elements to support cognitive health, as well as neurofeedback. And it turns out that neurofeedback and supportive nutrition is probably the best combination in order to make your brain work the way you'd like it to work.
Is there any contraindications? Is there anybody that should not play with mushrooms or should not add these in? I know it's a food, but it's medicinal in a lot of ways. So is there anyone that does not do well with this, or is this a pretty, like having a food, most people are fine with it?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we identified in the Ultimate Nutrition Bible, which is kind of behind me there, you can see on the wall, is you have to recognize that when you look at any research, and I took this way back in university, about the effective dose and the lethal dose within an element is a determination of how safe a pharmaceutical is or an element. There's no amount of mushrooms that you would take that you would do damage to yourself. Okay. And the reason is, now that's with the exception of the psychoactive ones. Some people who are susceptible with neurochemistry could have a cognitive break. With medicinal mushrooms, like you would get, let me back up. You'll see a bell curve of response within the population, and they average that bell curve for the effective dose versus the lethal dose, and that determines the safety of an element. That curve is significantly it's almost impossible to overdose on any type of food. There
Okay.
are some people that may have, for whatever reason, an adverse sensitivity to taking a mushroom. Usually that's related to their digestive system. They may have a recessive genetic characteristic. So you're maybe 1% or maybe even less than that
Hmm.
would have that. And that's where someone who's versed in your genetics would be able to quickly determine that for you. For
Makes
the
sense.
most part, if I was to take 1,000 people and give them all mushroom breakthrough, for example, you probably have one person that has a negative effect. You probably have maybe 50 to 100 would say, I don't know, I didn't really feel that much. 80% would say, oh, wow, I felt something on a various range. And then 10% was, it just fixed everything that I had in my life because it was happened to be the right element. And so what I suggest to people by getting a genetics expert to look at your stuff is to say, look, now you can give yourself the most likelihood of what supplements would be
Totally.
beneficial. And I think that fixing your gut's number one, addressing your vitamin, minerals, essential fatty
Yep.
acid, nutrient deficiencies, protein deficiencies, whatever that is, that would be number two. And then number three would be moving into something like mushroom breakthrough or various other supplements that would, give you the boost that you're looking for. But you always want to start with the foundational principles
Makes
first.
sense. Wait, might be a really dumb question. I don't know. I just want to ask 'cause I'm so curious. Like, so I kind of put mushrooms into like three camps, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing here, but there's like the food where there's shiitake or portobello or whatever. And then there's these like the psychedelic ones, right? That the extreme. And then there's all these like medicinal ones that you're talking about. Like, how did this is gonna, I don't even know if I'm asking the question right, but how does one figure out, like, how did they figure out which one was what? And like for the food ones, are there, when you just have like regular food mushrooms, are you getting some of these benefits? Or, and like on the other side, when you do some of these medicinal ones that aren't the psychedelics, if you had too much, could you get a psychedelic effect? I don't even know if you know what I'm asking, but is there an
Yeah.
overlay? Do they ever combine or
It's
cross over?
it's a great way to simplify and bucket them into a classification. Most of the research was passed down historically for thousands of years in,
Hmm.
like Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine. And the psychoactive ones fall particularly into a category of like MAO inhibitors and things like that. Again, you have to take a dosage and a specific and a freshness and
Hmm.
a density that's going to qualify that. When you're dealing with a nutritional supplement that you can get over the counter, you're not allowed to sell psychoactive medicines in most
So
places.
you're not going to have a problem. Like you
You're not
can't
going to
do too
have a, you're
much and
not going
that
to,
happens.
no, no.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what would happen if you just drank protein breakthrough all day long until you like vomited. But that would be an interesting experiment. Maybe I could try that, see if I get a psychedelic high. I will say there is a definite cognitive feel, and it's that
Okay.
calm, clear, well-resourced, everything's kind of good feeling that persists. And people will feel it initially, but there's a buildup
Yeah.
effect if you take it over a week or so, and you really start to notice. And that's just building up your neurochemical reserve.
Well, I'm wondering if you look at like marijuana, for example, like you can
Yes.
CBD, which doesn't make you
Yes.
high, right? But it's still the same plant where THC from that wood. So it's like the same thing, but it's different levels. So I guess that's where my head was going to.
Yeah, well, that's a great example. So, one of the reasons why there's so much research going into the cannabinoid plants in
Hmm.
particular is because all of your cells have receptor sites for cannabinoids. And essentially, that becomes a delivery agent. The potency of a
Hmm.
cannabinoid, so anything under the cannabis family, still serves as a delivery agent for whatever the potent molecule in. So there's these there's delta 8 and there's CBD and CBN and CBG. They're starting to
So many.
classify the
Yeah.
variants of these. And same thing with nicotine. I think you have 7 or 9 different receptors on nicotine. Now,
Hmm.
nicotine was used for healing practices throughout all of the world. And then in 1955, they decided they'd spray all these chemicals on nicotine, and that's what's caused all the cancer rates. Dr. Koch
Yeah.
couldn't find a cancer rate. Same thing as cannabis was banned because of the concentrations of THC, yet hemp was used regularly. In fact,
Right.
was the biggest textile industry in the United States back in the 1800s. Like your ropes, your sails, your clothing, all of this stuff was made from hemp. So the designations of same thing as mushrooms, people put cannabis in the same category as they put mushrooms in the category of psychedelics
Mm,
because it's the lack of understanding and
that makes
information of the
sense.
nuances, right? They put nicotine as a toxin where you could, one of my friends, Paul Check, and he taught me on how to use nicotine as a driver for essential oils and how to use
Sure.
herbs with it. use it in a vaporizer
But
bag
people
where you're
right
not
away put it with
smoking it.
cigarettes and say no. Yeah.
Bingo, which was the chemical elements to it. So a little bit of discernment, and then you have to really walk yourself back from the fear porn on social media. In order to get traction in today's social media world, people need an emotional response
Right.
to a non-emotional element. So you make a exclamatory headline that says, mushrooms are going to kill you, or raver overdosed on a set of mushrooms and
Yeah.
they're toxic. And then, some expert weighs in on what the dangers of mushrooms or the dangers of cannabis or the dangers of nicotine. And they're right on a generalized aspect. But when you start diving into the variations, you can find elements that will allow that. So cannabis is a particularly good delivery agent.
Okay.
So why did the mRNA vaccine come out? Because they're trying to deliver the elements that they wanted to produce inside the cell. Cannabis, I would argue, is probably a better delivery agent in their various elements that are now THC done in high dosages does have a suboptimal performance of aspect. I use CBD every day as an adjunct to the programs I use, and I notice that I get a better result from the elements I do because I'm delivering those key elements into the cell using cannabinoid receptors.
Wow. Okay. That's wild. Wow. Okay. When you look at the food mushroom, like just the food, not the any to shiitake mushrooms or portobello, maybe this is a huge stretch, but do you think the health benefits from that are like totally unrelated, just like you would say from a vegetable? Or do you think there's anything in those that are also providing some type of medicinal effect the way that some of these like lion's mane and chaga and all that are doing?
Yeah, I think if taken in appropriate dosage, again, volume is going to be the preparation, the
Yep.
potency of that mushroom. And so if you go to Chinese market, and I used to go
Okay.
down to the Chinese market in Vancouver, Canada, where I used to live, you would see a very well-versed culture in determining what mushrooms were
Yeah.
performative for their elements. And they had whole ratios and they had like quality that was determined. And I didn't understand a lot of it, but I remember going, here's the same mushrooms. This one's, $50 a pound. This one's $10 a pound. This one's $5 a pound based on, I think, ginseng's another one is a great thing. So you have all these elements that have grades of potency, effectiveness by the people who are around them a lot and get more refined in the nuances of that particular product. So when it comes to mushrooms, there's wide families. And keep in mind that the masters of any craft, they get really deep into that craft. So if you go to Japan, which I think has probably figured out food better than any culture on the planet, serving size, presentation, quality, all of it, they're really,
Yeah.
they're really, really good. They would take some of the mushrooms and that's a serving. These specific mushrooms and the senses are fine. And they also have a relatively clean diet. So the properties of that mushroom. So if you go to a master herbalist or a Chinese medicine, they would work with a particular plant for a period of time. Same thing in South America. If you go to the Shipibo people, they would take you, if you're going on a shamanic mission, they would take you out in the forest and they would experiment and determine which plants were the plants right for you, which became your master plant, you're the informer for you. And that would vary from person to person. So there's long historical elements to the nuances and depth. Much of that has been washed out of the world today.
Yeah.
And we use these, hyperbolic statements that gets people attention and it scares people away so that they, go to their
Right.
physician and get whatever pharmaceutical prescription that is to offset the symptoms of whatever they're feeling with whatever side effects that can get you on another drug later down the road.
I love talking to you, Wade, because I'm such a curious person. I was telling my husband the other day, I said, my favorite thing to do is my podcast is because I, as a kid, I'm that ADHD kid that a teacher would teach something and I had 5 million questions and I never felt like I would get my questions answered because I would be afraid to raise my hand because everybody else they already caught on earlier, but I love to like go deep and understand. So I love interviewing you because you always give me those light bulb moments. Like you let me go deeper. And I've never understood the mushroom thing until today. Like I see all the ads, I hear people talking about it. I've never gotten it. I've never quite understood. And in fact, I had tried random supplements I didn't get it. I was like, I don't understand. But now that I understand from you, I'm clear. It's like these 4, it has to be the right dose. It has to not have the cellulose. It has to be, there's a lot of steps that people are overlooking. And I see why combining it with coffee is probably not the best indicator if is this working or not. Because if you're doing that, like you've got this fake feedback initially, right? Like you got this initial
Correct.
feedback. And then I'm also hearing correctly, it's kind of like any of your supplements, like it's an over time thing. So it's not about just doing it one time and going, oh, that was amazing. It's about that buildup and your body using it and doing it over time. So I'm completely convinced now I need to get some and do more. Like this needs to be an everyday thing. I mean, I really, and I'm going to report back on what this does with my focus and my energy. So this is cool. So thank you for breaking it down so simply. You all, I love Bioptimizers. I mean, there's a number of their products that I use. And now I'm realizing I got to learn a lot more about all the products because I've always pretty much stuck to your gut stuff. Like I love your HCl and your enzyme and your microbiome breakthrough. But if you want to specifically get the mushroom one, you all, if you go to midlifeconversations.com/mushroom, so midlifeconversations.com/mushroom. And if there's a place to say I sent you, it's from, you can just say Natalie Jill. And I believe there's a built-in discount there, but we will make sure to link all of this up. Thank you so much for, as always, for fully explaining and for your knowledge and for what you keep innovating within the company.
Well, thanks so much. And I would also share to your listeners is one of the priorities that we have at Bioptimizers is I build out the customer service team. You talk to real people that can answer your questions in real
That's
time.
amazing.
So we're really responsive, and so you're not talking
Not
to
a bot or an AI thing
all that
or anything.
stuff. No,
Yeah.
no, it's people, and I've actually answered all of the questions inside
Wow.
that repertoire. I think we're up over 8,000 questions now.
Amazing.
And anything that gets in that they don't know, it gets forwarded to me, and then I go and research and answer it if I possibly can, or direct them to the person that can. The other element that we do, we have a 365-day money back guarantee. So
yeah, you
when
do, and they honor
try
that. You're amazing at with that.
any product that you try from Bioptimizers, try it for a couple of weeks, reap the benefits. If you don't feel anything for whatever reason, it doesn't work for you,
Yeah.
call us up, email us, text us, chat with us, whatever you want to do. We just refund your money. The reason we do that is I'm very clear that when people spend their hard-earned money, that there's nothing more expensive than a product that doesn't work,
Oh,
whether
yeah.
it's from me, somebody else, anyone else. And I said, look, I know that there's a small percentage that won't get the benefit, and I know that there's a large benefit that will. So to offset the financial risk that a person gets, I'm going to put 100% money back guarantee. So then they try it, they don't have any risk. They put it out, and we will direct them to a product that might be better for them for maybe what they're looking for. They talk to one of our staff. The other one, you don't have the risk. But guess what? Turns out, I know almost everybody in the industry, we have the lowest refund rates in the entire industry and one of the highest subscription rates of anyone in the industry. And the reason is we make products that are well researched, that have the potency, that work, that feel good, taste good, work good, and something that you'll want to add to your life for a long, long time because you'll see the benefits. And that's the end of the day. At the end of the day, you take something because there's an ambition, there's a challenge that you're looking to face. We're trying to bridge the gap with products that we feel that we can be best in category in the industry. And that's our promise from Bioptimizers.
And I love watching you grow. I mean, I smile when I see your stuff in Sprouts. I see like it's cool. So y'all, you can go through my link and get the discount, but you can also go to Sprouts and find it there. I love watching you all grow. Thank you so much, Wade. Thank you.
Thanks so much.